In this video, I'm sharing my top 5 favorite gambits that I have worked on and made my own. Kind of like how Eric Rosen made the Stafford Gambit popular. What makes these gambits special is the unique strategies I have added to them, ones you won't find anywhere else on YouTube or on internet. So let's just say these are my elbow gambits. Gambit number 1 that I trust is the Fianchetto Gambit, where white begins with e4, and then as black, you respond with pawn to g6. This looks dubious, as you are about to see, but it works, especially in rapid, blitz, and bullet, and it's not easy for white to crack. After pawn to d4, this is where you want to surprise your opponent with a move, f5. Point is, if pawn takes, you simply go pawn to d5, and after fg, which most of the people do, you simply take back with your h-pawn. Again, I do understand this could be an old opening known by some grandmasters, but I did more than enough to reinvent it and add my own strategies. My unique strategy in the Fianchetto Gambit is that after bishop d3 by white, you will start with queen d6. This ensures that black doesn't play bishop a4 in the near future, also defending your g6 pawn indirectly, and knight f3 will always go together with bishop g4. If pawn to h3, you leave your bishop on g4 for good, knowing white can't take due to rook takes. And so if pawn to h3 comes, what you want to do is just to develop your queen's knight, as you are going to see. Sometimes pawn to h6 may become handy, especially when you are preventing knight b5 in the near future. So here's an example of one of my games: bishop d3 attacking my pawn, and then queen d6 defending it, and also stopping bishop f4 in some variations. So my 2400 rated opponent played knight f3 in this position, and this is when I played bishop g4, pinning the knight to the queen. He wasted his chance by playing pawn to h3, after which I played knight c6. So my opponent played pawn to c3 to defend their d4 pawn, and then I played pawn to e5. This is the next phase of our plan. Remember, at first I said you have to develop your queen on d6, play bishop g4 and knight c6, but pawn to e5 is our main pawn break. And here is how we develop our dark squared bishop, well, by putting it on h6, and our king's knight usually sits on f5 someday after we trade off our light squared bishop, and in some cases we just castle long to secure our king. As I said, a6 may also become necessary depending on what white does. Anyway, after pawn to e5, white usually takes, and then we take back with our knight, and this is where most of my opponents play queen e2 and sometimes bishop e2, like what my opponent did. And this is why I take on f3 after bishop takes, and this is what I did in this game that I'm analyzing. My opponent castled short, and then I played bishop h6. Remember, we develop our dark squared bishop on h6 and our king's knight on f5. This is my main plan. My opponent took on h6. This allowed me to develop my knight with tempo. Now it'll be easier for me to put it on f5. Knight d2 was played, and then I played g5. Now you see the other plan of leaving our pawn on g6 to push it further and open the king side. My opponent played pawn to g3 for some reason, but I just played g4. White took, and then I played rook dg8, rook e1, knight takes, bishop takes with check, knight takes, and then after queen f3, even though I could have done all sorts of things like queen h6 or queen d7, I saw a beautiful tactic. The tactic involved a knight sacrifice on f2, which I did, by the way. King takes was played, and then I played rook h2 check, king e3 was played, rook e8 check, and ended up meeting my opponent like this. Before I move on to my second favorite gambit, there are times when your opponent may choose to decline this so-called Fianchetto Gambit by just advancing their pawn to e5. What do you do? Again, there's a plan that I recommended, which goes as follows. You go pawn to d6, that's number 1. If f4, you will take the pawn on e5. Done. Then the next move you will play is pawn to e6, over controlling the d5 square, followed by knight e7. Then next, you develop your b knight on c6, and in case of bishop b5, you go a6 followed by pawn to b5 to create room for your light squared bishop. That's how you develop your light squared bishop. Sometimes if bishop b5 doesn't come, you can still play a6 in advance followed by pawn to b5 and bishop b7. How about the king side? You simply go pawn to h6 even against pawn to h4, and it will be up to you to decide where you want to castle to, either on f7, short or long, after developing your queen. So this is the simple system that you can follow in the decline variation. Anyway, Gambit number 2 is what I'm playing nowadays. That involves the Mykonos defense. I call it a gambit due to its sacrificial nature, as you are about to see. This begins as the French defense, but later on I go knight c6 instead of playing d5. So knight c6 kind of invites white to play d5, and this is where it becomes crazy, because in this line I intend to sacrifice my knight on e5 like this. I know that this will either be a draw or a win for me. Plan is, if pawn to g3, I win back a piece by taking the rook on h1. And to make a quick draw against anybody, especially higher rated opponents, I just continue giving perpetual checks on these highlighted squares with my queen. King e2, queen h5 check. If king d3 or king e3, I win the free queen on d1. So king d2, queen h6 check, king d3, queen a6 check, king c3, queen c6 check, king b3, queen b6 check. And the moment I manage to attain this position where white's king sits on c3 and my queen on b6, I know that I'm winning due to bishop b4 check. And the only position that you need to memorize in this Mykonos defense is where you place your queen on f2 after king d3, pawn takes, king takes, and bam! So you lock your opponent's king in a box, and from here your main pawn break that opens up many lines will be this d5 pawn push that will pave the way for your light squared bishop. For example, after knight f3 you just go d5 check, paving way for your bishop. If ed, you have knight f6 check, no need to go bishop f5, that will just be a free piece and you may probably lose. So you need to be tactically sharp when you're playing the Mykonos defense. If king d3, you have bishop f5 check, queen c5 and all that. If king f4, there are so many ways to kill a rat, one of which is bishop takes d6 check. You can also castle short and continue attacking. That's not much of a stretch, but whenever you see your opponent's king on f4, just go pawn to g5 check. This paves the way for your rook, as you are going to see. If king takes, you go rook g8 check. The more pieces you bring into the game, the higher chances you have for winning. For example, if the king goes back to f4, you have rook g4 check, and after king e5, there is this, but even better, queen c5 check, because the only move here is for white to donate their queen, and then you go queen takes, king f6 and queen e6 checkmate. If white's king takes the knight on f6, you have rook g6 check. After king e5 only move, again you have queen c5 check. If king f4, you have rook g4 checkmate. If king e4, again you have bishop f5 check followed by checkmate. Even though the Mykonos is not really a gambit, like I said, it feels like one due to its sacrificial nature and the fact that we obviously sacrifice a lot of pawns when trying to checkmate white's king, and that happens in the opening stage. Anyway, before I continue, this will probably be your last time to hear from me ever again. If you don't subscribe or if you don't hit the like button and leaving a comment down below, because the YouTube algorithm won't be recommending my videos to you and to others. Also, if you don't share this video, YouTube won't like me. So do the needful to keep this channel alive, because you are the hero. Thank you. Gambit number 3 that I popularized is the so-called Williams Gambit that may arise from the Scandinavian defense where you go pawn to f4 instead of taking on d5. What's the catch? If pawn takes, you simply go bishop c4, targeting the weak f7 square. Most of my opponents here play knight to f6. Why? Why would you do that? Anyway, this is where I play d3, sacrificing my second pawn, because if pawn takes, I have this nasty idea of pre-moving knight e2. In fact, I pre-move the first 4 moves, giving an impression as if I don't know what I'm doing to my opponents, and so they end up taking my knight as well, forgetting that I have bishop takes f7 check, and in the process winning the free queen on d1. This is how I win most of my games, all 100% wins. Anyway, the other way I reach the Williams Gambit position is by beginning with the bird's opening. This is the most assured way because you know the top played move in the Lichess database, as you can see, is pawn to d5, after which you go pawn to e4, kind of the Scandinavian, right? And this is where most people take on e4. Why? Because now you just go bishop c4, and once again after knight f6, you pre-move d3 and knight e2. That'll be played automatically. But not too fast. After you go d3, some of your opponents may play bishop g4. Thanks to this other pre-move that shields your queen, so there will be no bishop takes. Anyway, if black continues by taking on d3, you just play knight bc3 very fast. In fact, you can also pre-move this, giving an impression as if you hanged your knight, because after pawn takes, Once again, you have this tricky move bishop takes followed by queen takes. If you want to know more about this and how you can continue playing like a pro even if it doesn't work as planned, simply watch my full tutorial on the Williams Gambit. In fact, I'm just going to leave all the links to these videos in the comment section down below. No worries, I'm not going to include the Tennyson Gambit that I popularized in my 2022 video that has popped up in the card above. Yeah, like for real. I did a whole lot covering the Tennyson Gambit. Anyway, Gambit number 4. This may happen in the Sicilian defense where you try to go back to the Tennyson like this. Start with the Alpine variation. And if black plays the second most played move, pawn to d5, which is known as the anti-Alpine variation by many grandmasters, you simply give up your pawn like this. You go knight f3, because after pawn takes, you have knight g5 in an effort to get back your pawn. By this time of the game, most of my opponents play knight f6, trying to hold on to their extra pawn. They want to play bishop f5 next. But anyways, I just go ahead and give them the second pawn, which they take most of the times, and this is where I take back with my bishop. And pawn to h6 is what most people play, like in the Tennyson Gambit, cause they are not comfortable with this knight. But this is where I surprise them with a move knight takes f7 sacrifice, double attacking the queen and the rook. Point is, if king takes, now I go bishop g6 check in order to win the free queen on d8. Kind of the Tennyson Gambit, right? Anyway, the last gambit with black that I kinda popularized is the O'Sullivan Gambit. But not like how many YouTubers and chess teachers teach this gambit, as you are going to see. The main line O'Sullivan Gambit goes as follows. After white plays e4, you start with the allies defense, and after e5, this is why you go knight d5, hoping that white plays d4 so that you can sacrifice your b pawn like this. And the point is, if white takes, you want to sacrifice your c pawn like this so that if they take, you win a free bishop, beginning with queen a5 check. Because you know, after knight c3, you have knight takes with tempo, and after bc, this is when you take that free bishop. This is all great, but I like playing this in the queen's pawn game when white starts with d4. And then I go pawn to b5 right away, which is the Polish defense, because I know most of the times white plays pawn to e4, taking up the whole center and also attacking that pawn, and this is where I play knight f6. Point is, if pawn to e5, this is where I play knight d5, and boom, just like that, the game transposes back to the Alliance defense or O'Sullivan Gambit without white even realizing it. Point is, if bishop takes, once again, I sacrifice my second pawn, and if pawn takes, I go queen a5 check to win that bishop. But sometimes, people like playing pawn to c4, which is the second most played move. Well, even after this, you can just go ahead and take on d4. That's the plan, because if pawn takes, just like before, you can go queen a5 check. This time, knight c3 makes no sense due to pawn takes. People play bishop d2 here, but queen takes b5 leaves a big question mark. From the O'Sullivan Gambit, the other idea that I kinda popularized recently is the Sicilian Nimzowitsch variation. This is where white starts with e4, and then I go pawn to c5, the Sicilian defense, and after knight f3, what do? I immediately go knight to f6, inviting the move pawn to e5, because most white players like advancing their e-pawn. After this, again you want to go knight d5, kind of the alliance as you can see, and the moment your opponent plays pawn to d4, which they do play most of the times in the Sicilian, this is where you want to sacrifice your b pawn, again the same way you do in the O'Sullivan Gambit. And point is, if white takes any of these pawns, they are going to lose terribly. For example, after bishop takes, now you go queen a5 check, and just like in the O'Sullivan Gambit, if knight c3, the whole idea is just to win back a free piece, the bishop, like this. After pawn to b5, if white takes this other pawn, your c pawn, once again you can just go pawn to e6, attacking this c5 pawn, and believe it or not, they always go back to this other pawn, which still allows you to go queen a5 check. And maybe this time, let's just say they go bishop d2. Well, this is where you can take the bishop, also preventing them from casting shot. After pawn to b3, you can just go ahead and grab the c5 pawn again, If castle short, you go bishop b7 and you have more activity. Let me know which gambit you like the most out of the 5 that I popularized on YouTube. And if there's any other elbow gambit that I left out, please remind me in the comment section down below, because I've done a lot of these dubious and serious gambits such that at times I end up forgetting them and mixing them up. So remind me if there's any other gambit that I didn't cover that introduced you to KaspaChess.